I didn't know you could feel homeless in your own house until I came back from church and found my life stacked beside lawn chairs and paint cans. The garage door was half open, letting in a thin blade of afternoon light. It cut across my winter coats like a judgment. For a moment, I stood there holding my Bible, the pages still warm from my hands, trying to understand what I was looking at. My shoes were lined up against the wall where the old freezer used to be. My sewing box, blue tin with the bent clasp, sat on top of a crate labeled Christmas, and my bedspread, the one my late husband picked out because it reminded him of the ocean, was folded tight, like it had been put away for good. I remember the smell first. Motor oil, dust, that sharp metallic cold that garages have, even in spring. It didn't smell like me. It didn't smell like home. I set my Bible down on a box and whispered, "What happened?" as if the boxes might answer. No one did. Inside the house, the clock on the microwave blinked 12 like it always did when the power went out, except the power hadn't gone out. Someone had just unplugged it. The living room looked rearranged, not messy, intentional. The couch cushions I favored were gone, replaced by square gray ones with stiff corners. My lamp, the one with the soft yellow shade, had been moved to the hallway, and in my bedroom, where my dresser used to stand, there was now a crib. A crib? I stood there long enough to hear my own breathing change, shorter, thinner, like I'd stepped into someone else's lungs. I had gone to church for 2 hours where I sang hymns I've sung my whole life, where I bowed my head and prayed for patience, for family, for understanding, and in that time, my daughter-in-law had decided where I belonged. Before that Sunday, my life was simple in the way that comes from years of learning how little you truly need. I'm 68 years old. I lived in that house for 42 years, long enough to know where the floor creaks and which window sticks when it rains. I raised my son Daniel there after his father passed. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. I worked as a school secretary for 30 years, made casseroles that fed half the block, and paid my bills on time. The house wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every wall held a memory that didn't need explaining. Daniel used to say the house smelled like cinnamon and old books. He meant it kindly. When he married Rachel, I tried to make room, not just in the house, but in myself. She was young, organized, and spoke with the confidence of someone who had never had to ask twice. She didn't mean harm, I told myself. She just had plans, lists, a way of doing things that made her feel secure. When they told me they were expecting, I cried into the dish towel, and not because I was sad, but because something old and good cracked open in me. I offered them the spare room. I meant it to be temporary, just until they saved enough, just until they found their footing. Daniel hugged me too tight and said, "Thanks, Mom, just for a little while." Rachel smiled and said, "We'll make it work." Those were her words, "We'll make it work," not "Thank you," not "Are you sure?" But I told myself not to read into it. I told myself this was what family did. At first, it was small things. The pantry reorganized without a word. My spices moved into matching jars I couldn't tell apart. The television volume lowered because the baby needed quiet, even when the baby was at home. Rachel would correct me gently, then not so gently. "We don't use that cleaner around the baby. We're trying a new sleep schedule. Maybe it's better if you eat earlier." Daniel avoided my eyes when she spoke like that. He always had an excuse. Work was stressful. The baby wasn't sleeping. Rachel was just tired. I folded myself smaller to fit. On Sundays, I went to church like I always had. It was the one place that still felt untouched. Mrs. Holloway's perfume in the pew ahead of me, the sound of the choir warming up, the way the light came through the stained glass just before noon. That morning, I prayed longer than usual. I asked for peace in my home. I asked for wisdom. I asked God to help me be generous without disappearing. When I got back, Rachel's car was in the driveway. I remember thinking, that's odd. They said they were going out. The house was quiet, too quiet. The baby wasn't crying, the television wasn't on, my name wasn't called. I set my purse down and noticed my hallway runner was gone. The photos from the wall, my wedding picture, Daniel's graduation, were stacked neatly on the dining table, leaning against each other like they were waiting. That's when I walked into the garage. Rachel stood in the kitchen when I came back inside. She was holding the baby, bouncing gently, like this was just another afternoon. "Oh," she said, looking up, "you're home." I waited for the rest of the sentence. It never came. "Rachel," I said, my voice sounding far away, "where are my things in the garage?" She didn't flinch. That's what I remember most. No surprise, no guilt. She just adjusted the baby on her hip and said, "We needed the space." "For what?" I asked, though I already knew. She glanced down the hallway. "The nursery, and, well, it makes more sense this way." "This way?" I repeated. My hands were shaking, so I folded them together. "This is my house." Daniel appeared behind her then, rubbing his neck. He looked tired. He always did when he didn't want to choose. "Mom," he said quietly, "we talked about this." I stared at him. "When?" Rachel answered for him. "We figured it would be easier if we just did it." Easier for who, I wondered, because it didn't feel easy standing there, feeling like a guest in the place where I had buried my husband and raised my child. I looked at the baby, my grandson, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the lines being drawn around him. I said, "Did you think to ask me?" Rachel's smile was thin. "We didn't think you'd mind." That's when something settled in my chest, heavy, certain. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a decision, and I was the last to know. I nodded once, slowly, the way you do when you're trying not to cry in front of people who don't deserve your tears. "All right," I said. "I see." And for the first time since they moved in, I stopped trying to make it work. That night, I didn't sleep in the garage. I slept on the couch, my coat folded under my head, listening to the house breathe in a way it never had before. The refrigerator hummed louder than usual. The hallway light stayed on all night, a pale strip cutting under the bedroom door that used to be mine. Every time the baby stirred, Rachel was there before the sound fully formed, like she was guarding something precious from being taken. From me, I thought. In the morning, I made coffee the way I always had, 2 scoops, not 3, because that was how my husband liked it. I drank it standing up, staring at the spot on the counter where my radio used to sit. Rachel came in halfway through my second cup, already dressed, already in charge of the day. "We're trying to keep things quieter in the mornings," she said, not unkindly, just firmly. "The baby schedule is really important." I nodded. I nodded a lot back then. It was easier than explaining how tired I was of being corrected in my own kitchen. Daniel left early for work. He kissed the baby, grabbed his keys, and avoided me like a piece of furniture he wasn't ready to move yet. I wanted to stop him. I wanted to ask when my house had become a project they were finishing without me. But the words stayed behind my teeth. After breakfast, Rachel opened the garage door again. "We should probably go through your things," she said, glancing at the boxes like they were overdue errands. "Some of this could be donated." "My husband's coats are in there," I said quietly. She paused, just for a second. "Oh, well, we can set those aside." Set them aside, like memories could be sorted into piles. That was the first time I realized something important. Rachel didn't see me as an obstacle. She saw me as a phase, something temporary, something to be organized and moved along once it stopped being useful. Over the next week, the house shifted around me. My chair at the table disappeared, replaced by a high chair. My bath towels were swapped for smaller ones, folded in a way that made them feel borrowed. Rachel labeled cabinets. She rearranged the freezer. She put a baby gate across the hallway that made it harder for me to reach the back door. "I just want to keep him safe," she said when I tripped over it. I smiled and said, "Of course," but inside, something small and sharp was taking notes. I started noticing what she didn't say, the way she spoke around me, not to me, how decisions were made in low voices after I went to bed, how Daniel's laughter sounded different now, shorter, practiced, like a man trying to keep the peace by giving up pieces of himself. One afternoon, I came home from the grocery store to find a man in the living room measuring the windows. "Oh, that's Merk," she waved a hand. "He's here about the new blinds." "New blinds?" I asked. "The baby needs better light control." I looked at the windows. They were the same ones Daniel learned to walk beside, holding on to the sill, the same ones my husband replaced after the storm in '92. They let in morning sun and late afternoon gold. They didn't need fixing. But Mark took measurements anyway. That night, I finally spoke. "Daniel," I said when Rachel went upstairs with the baby, "can we talk?" He sat across from me at the table, his hands wrapped around a glass of water he hadn't touched. "I don't feel at home," I said gently. He sighed. "It's just an adjustment period." "Adjustment for who?" "For everyone," though his eyes slid away again. "I need to know how long you're planning to stay." My voice didn't shake. I was proud of that. Rachel appeared in the doorway, as if summoned by the word stay. "We talked about this, until we're stable." "And what does stable look like?" I asked. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Comfortable." That was the word. Comfortable. Not grateful, not temporary, comfortable enough to rearrange someone else's life without asking. I excused myself and went to the garage. I sat on a box marked books and opened one at random. It was a cookbook from our first Christmas together, the pages stained and loved. I pressed it to my chest and let myself cry quietly so no one would accuse me of upsetting the baby. The first real clue came on a Thursday. I was looking for my birth certificate. Something told me to keep it close, though I couldn't have explained why. The file cabinet in the study had been moved, another quiet change, and when I opened it, my folders were gone. In their place were neatly labeled binders, house improvements, budget, future plans. I opened one. Inside were printouts, mortgage calculators, notes in Rachel's handwriting, phrases circled in pen, equity, long-term, refinance. My hands went cold. Daniel had never talked to me about the mortgage. It was nearly paid off, 5 years left. I had planned that house like a promise to myself, to my late husband, to the life we built. I closed the binder and put it back exactly where it was. I didn't confront them yet. Instead, I listened. I listened from the hallway when voices dropped in the kitchen. I listened when Daniel said, "I don't know, Ratch," and Rachel answered, "She'll understand eventually." I listened when my name became a pronoun instead of a person. "She doesn't need that room. She'll be fine." She's set in her ways. Each sentence pressed a little harder on my chest. One evening, I found a flyer on the counter, Senior Living Options, Downsizing Made Easy. I stared at it for a long time. Rachel walked in and froze. "Oh, that's not for you," she said. "She was just researching." "For what?" I asked. "For the future," she replied smoothly. "It's good to have options." Options. I folded the flyer and slipped it into my pocket. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was steady, clear, like something had finally come into focus. They weren't just rearranging my house. They were rearranging my place in their lives, and they had already decided where I would end up. I didn't confront them right away. There's a certain kind of womanhood you earn with age. The ability to wait without freezing, to watch without flinching. I had spent years learning how to read people by what they avoided, not what they said. And Rachel was avoiding something big. So I started paying attention. I noticed how she always answered the phone in the hallway now, her voice lowered just enough to be polite, not enough to be secretive. I noticed how Daniel had stopped opening the mail, leaving it stacked neatly on the counter until Rachel sorted it in the evenings. I noticed how my name was no longer on the grocery list taped to the fridge, replaced by Mom's items written in smaller letters at the bottom. One afternoon, I came home early from volunteering at the food pantry. I'd forgotten my sweater, and the wind had turned sharp. Rachel's car was in the driveway, but the house was quiet. Too quiet. I set my purse down and heard voices in the study. Rachel's voice first. "If we refinance, we can clear the credit cards and still have enough to renovate the bathroom." Daniel murmured something I couldn't hear. "And it makes sense," she continued. "I mean, it's basically our house now. We live here. We're raising our child here." My heart thudded, not loud, but deep. "I just don't want to hurt her," Daniel said. There it was, not "I don't want to do this," just "I don't want to hurt her." Rachel sighed. "We're not hurting her. We're helping her. She can't manage this place forever." I leaned against the wall, my hand flat on the cool paint. I didn't move. I didn't breathe too loudly. I waited. "We'll talk to her after we get the paperwork together," Rachel said. "It'll be easier once it's done." Once it's done. I stepped back carefully, every joint in my body suddenly aware of itself. I left the house without my sweater and walked until my fingers went numb. I ended up at the cemetery. My husband's headstone sat under the maple tree we planted the year Daniel turned 10. I brushed leaves off the stone and sat on the cold bench beside it. "They're planning to take the house," I said out loud. My voice sounded strange in the open air. "They think I won't notice." The wind moved through the branches like a long breath. I didn't cry. I'd cried enough in the garage, on the couch, into towels and cookbooks. This was different. This was clarity. That night, I pulled out every document I could find. The deed, the mortgage statements, my will. Everything was in my name, always had been. I kept them in a folder under my bed, well, under the bed that used to be mine. I slept with the folder beside me. The next morning, I called a lawyer. His office smelled like coffee and old paper, the kind of place where truths are spoken quietly and taken seriously. I laid everything out. The moved belongings, the binders, the conversations I overheard. He listened without interrupting. He said finally, "You can't do anything without your consent, but intent matters, and timing matters." "What should I do?" I asked. He folded his hands. "Protect yourself, and don't tip your hand until you're ready." On the way home, I stopped at the bank. I changed passwords, I froze access, I made copies. The teller looked at me with mild curiosity, like she was trying to guess what kind of trouble a woman my age could be in. Plenty, I thought. At home, Rachel was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with sharp, efficient movements. "You're back early," she said. "I had errands," I replied. She nodded, already moving on. That evening, Daniel found me in the living room, sitting in my old chair, the one she hadn't managed to replace yet. "Mom," Daniel said, "Rachel mentioned you seemed distant." I looked up at him, really looked. The lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. He wasn't a villain. He was a man trying to keep everyone happy and failing quietly. "I am," I said, "because I don't feel respected." He winced. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" I asked. "Did either of you ask before moving my things?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. "Did you plan to talk to me about the mortgage?" His face drained of color. "You were listening?" "I was living here," I said. "There's a difference." Rachel appeared behind him, arms crossed. "This is getting dramatic. We're just trying to build a future." "At my expense," I replied calmly. She scoffed. "You're being emotional." I smiled then, slow and sad. "No, I'm being attentive." That night, I packed a suitcase, not to leave, but to be ready. The following Sunday, I went to church again. I sat in the same pew, sang the same hymns, but I didn't pray for patience this time. I prayed for courage. When I got home, the garage door was fully open. Rachel and Daniel stood beside a moving truck. "We thought it would be easier," Rachel said, gesturing toward the truck. "We found a place for you, just temporary." "For me?" I asked. Daniel couldn't meet my eyes. I looked at the truck, at the boxes already loaded, my boxes, and I realized something important. They hadn't just planned this, they had scheduled it. I stood there in my church shoes, my purse still looped over my arm, and stared at the moving truck like it was a foreign language I'd suddenly been expected to understand. "For me?" I repeated, softly. Rachel nodded, brisk and efficient. "It's a lovely senior apartment, very safe, quiet. You'll like it." Daniel shifted his weight. "Mom, it's just for now." "For now," I said, tasting the words. "And when was I going to be told?" Rachel exchanged a glance with him, the kind people share when they think they've already explained enough. "We didn't want to stress you out." I walked past them, into the garage. My things were no longer just stacked. They were sorted, labeled, reduced. My life had been compressed into cardboard and tape. Boxes marked linens, books, Mom. Just Mom. No last name, no history, like I was an item that came with instructions. I reached for one box and opened it. Inside were my photo albums. Not all of them, just the ones Rachel deemed important. My wedding, Daniel as a baby, a few holidays. The rest, my parents, my friends, my late husband's quiet years, were missing. "Where are the others?" I asked, my voice steady. Rachel glanced over. "Those were bulky. We figured you wouldn't need everything." Daniel swallowed. "We're trying to make this easy." I closed the box carefully. "Do you know," I said, turning to face them, "that this house is in my name?" Rachel stiffened. Daniel looked at the floor. "Yes," she said finally, "but that doesn't change the fact that this setup isn't sustainable." "For whom?" I asked. "For us," she said, and then added, as if remembering manners, "for everyone." I nodded slowly. "And did you consider asking me if I wanted to move?" She sighed, exasperated now. "You've been unhappy." "I've been quiet. There's a difference." Daniel stepped forward. "Mom, we already paid the deposit. It's done." Something in me went very still. "You paid a deposit," I repeated, "on my behalf?" Rachel crossed her arms. "We're helping you transition." "No," I said, "you're removing me." Her mouth tightened. "That's dramatic." I laughed then, just once. It surprised all of us. "You moved my bed into a garage. You planned my exit while I was praying for this family. If that isn't removal, I don't know what is." Daniel's voice cracked. "What do you want us to do?" I looked at my son, the boy I once rocked to sleep in the very room he'd turned into a nursery. "I want you to stop, now." Rachel shook her head. "That's not realistic." "Then neither is this conversation," I replied. I walked past them again into the house and picked up the phone. Rachel followed me. "Who are you calling?" "My lawyer," I said. She laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "You wouldn't." I dialed anyway. The room went quiet as I spoke. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply stated facts. When I hung up, Rachel's face had changed. Not angry, calculating. "This doesn't have to get ugly," she said. "It already is," I replied. Daniel rubbed his temples. "Can we just talk?" "We've talked enough. Now we're listening." That evening, I sat at the dining table while Rachel paced. The baby slept upstairs, blissfully unaware of the lines being drawn beneath him. "You can't just kick us out," Rachel said. I folded my hands. "I haven't asked you to leave, but you're threatening us." "I'm protecting myself." Daniel looked between us. "Mom, where is this coming from?" I met his eyes. "From the moment I realized you were willing to let someone else erase me to make your life easier." His shoulders slumped. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" I asked gently. "You let her move my bed. You let her plan my future. You let her treat me like a guest in my own home." Rachel scoffed. "You're overreacting." I stood then. My knees trembled, but my voice didn't. "I buried my husband from this house. I paid for this roof with decades of work. I raised my son here, and I welcomed you into it. That was my choice. Moving me out was not yours." The silence that followed felt heavy, but honest. Finally, Daniel spoke. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," I replied, "that the moving truck is leaving empty." Rachel's face flushed. "We have a baby." "And I have a life, one that doesn't belong in a garage." She turned to Daniel. "Are you going to let her do this?" He looked at me, really looked, for the first time in months. "Rachel, we shouldn't have done this." Her eyes widened. "You're choosing her?" "I'm choosing what's right," he said. I felt no triumph, only a deep, aching sadness. The truck left that night, not with my things, but with theirs. They packed in silence. Rachel didn't look at me once. Daniel hugged me before they drove off, his arms tight, his breath uneven. "I'm sorry, Mom, I know. But apologies don't rewind time." When the taillights disappeared, I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes and too much quiet. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired and certain. The house didn't feel like mine again right away. Even after the moving truck was gone, even after the driveway sat empty and quiet, there was a hollowness that lingered, like a room after a long argument, clean on the surface, heavy underneath. I walked through each space slowly that night, touching things I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The edge of the counter where I used to lean while stirring soup. The door frame with pencil marks from Daniel's childhood. The arm of my chair, worn smooth by years of evening prayers and folded laundry. I slept in my old bedroom for the first time in weeks. The bed creaked when I sat down, familiar and comforting. I didn't change the sheets. I wanted the scent of home, lavender detergent and something faintly floral, like the soap I've always used. I lay there staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the quiet settle back into place. It felt earned, but fragile, like it might leave again if I wasn't careful. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. There was no baby crying, no whispered conversations, no sense of tiptoeing around someone else's rules. I made coffee and drank it sitting down, my feet flat on the floor, the radio playing softly again. For the first time in a long while,
My shoulders loosened. But peace doesn't mean the storm is over. By noon, my phone started buzzing. First Daniel, I let it ring. Then a message from my sister. "What happened last night?" Daniel sounded upset. Then a voicemail from Rachel's mother. I didn't listen to it yet. By afternoon, the story had traveled, trimmed, reshaped, softened in some places and sharpened in others. I was painted as stubborn, as cold, as unwilling to compromise. No one mentioned the garage or the moving truck or the fact that my exit had been planned without my knowledge. I expected that. Truth rarely arrives first. What I didn't expect was the knock at my door. It was Mrs. Holloway from church. She stood on my porch holding a casserole dish wrapped in foil. Her eyes were kind but curious, the way people look when they think they're about to step into a confession. "I heard you had a rough week," she said gently. I stepped aside. "Come in." We sat at the table, the casserole untouched between us. She didn't ask right away. She waited. That's how I knew she meant well. Finally, she said, "Rachel told some of us you asked them to leave." I nodded. "That's true." Her brow creased. But not the way it sounds," I finished. I told her everything. Not dramatically, not defensively, just plainly. The moved belongings, the binders, the truck. By the time I finished, her hands were folded tight in her lap. "Oh," she said quietly. "Oh my." That evening, more calls came. Different tones now, less accusation, more pause. Daniel came by the next day, alone. He stood in the doorway like he used to when he was a teenager and knew he'd done something wrong but didn't know how to say it. "Mom," he said, "Rachel's staying with her mother." I nodded. "She's angry," he added. "I know," I said. He sat across from me at the table, his shoulders slumped. "I didn't think it would go that far." "That's the trouble with not thinking," I replied gently. "It always goes somewhere." He rubbed his eyes. "I should have stopped it." "Yes," I said, "you should have." He looked up, surprised not at my words, but at my tone. I wasn't angry, I wasn't scolding, I was stating something settled. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I believe you," I said, "but belief doesn't undo harm." We sat in silence for a while. "Mom," he said finally, "do you want me to come back?" I shook my head. "Not right now." His face fell. "This house is mine, and I need time in it alone to remember who I am without shrinking." He nodded slowly. "Okay." When he left, I didn't cry. I went to the garage. I opened every box. I put my things back where they belonged, not just in rooms, but in my life. I rehung pictures. I returned the lamp to its spot. I moved the crib out of my bedroom and back into storage. Each action felt deliberate, restorative. That night, I slept deeply. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They came in ripples. Rachel's mother stopped calling. Word spread at church, not gossip exactly, but understanding, the kind that settles when people see the whole picture. Rachel sent a message a week later. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted what was best for my family." I stared at it for a long time before replying. "So did I." That was all. Daniel came by Sundays sometimes. We spoke carefully at first, like two people relearning a shared language. He told me he was going to counseling. I told him I was proud of him. We didn't talk about the house, because it no longer needed defending. Time has a way of revealing what power hides. In the weeks that followed, the story settled into the community like dust after a door slam. People stopped whispering and started asking quieter, better questions. A few neighbors came by with baked goods and careful smiles. Others simply nodded with a kind of respect I hadn't noticed before. Not pity, recognition. I returned to church the following Sunday and sat in my usual pew. The hymns sounded the same, but I sang them differently now, not pleading, not asking, just steady. Mrs. Holloway squeezed my hand during the closing prayer. When I looked around afterward, I noticed something that made my chest warm. No one avoided me. No one looked away. Rachel didn't come. Daniel arrived late and sat 2 rows behind me. He didn't try to catch my eye, and I didn't turn around. We both knew where we stood. Later that afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. Not an email, not a text, a letter. Rachel's handwriting was neat, controlled, every loop intentional. She wrote about stress, about postpartum fear, about how small she'd felt moving into someone else's home, even if that home had welcomed her. She wrote that she hadn't realized how much space she'd taken until she lost it. But what she didn't write mattered more. She didn't apologize for the garage. She didn't apologize for the truck. She didn't apologize for planning my removal. She wrote, "I hope someday you'll understand why I did what I did." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my drawer. Understanding, I had learned, does not always require agreement. Daniel came by one evening after work, his tie loosened, his eyes tired in a way I recognized from his father's last years. "I moved into an apartment near the office," he said. I nodded. "That's good." "I needed space," he added quickly, "to think." I poured him tea and sat across from him. "I didn't protect you," he said suddenly, "and I didn't protect myself." I waited. He continued, "She made me feel like choosing you meant failing my family, and choosing her meant betraying you." "And what do you think now?" I asked. He stared into his cup. "I think I let someone convince me that love had to be exclusive, like there was only room for one woman in my life." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. I said, "There was always room, but not if you let someone start pushing people out." He nodded, tears threatening but not falling. "I'm learning that." We talked for hours that night, not about blame, but about boundaries, about fear, about how easy it is to confuse peace with silence. When he left, he hugged me the way he used to, as if grounding himself. Spring came slowly that year. I replanted the garden myself, turned the soil, let my hands get dirty. I replaced the broken fence slat Daniel never got around to fixing. I repainted the hallway the soft cream it had always been before Rachel decided gray was more modern. I didn't rush. Healing doesn't respond well to urgency. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea and watched the neighborhood children ride their bikes in uneven circles. I felt something unfamiliar but welcome settle into my bones. Autonomy. Rachel called me 2 months later. I almost didn't answer. "Hello?" I said finally. There was a pause. Then, "I'm not calling to argue." "I know," I replied. She cleared her throat. "Daniel told me you're doing well." "I am," I said. Another pause. I didn't realize how much control I was trying to take. I waited again. She admitted, "I was afraid, and I acted like fear was authority." That, at least, was honest. She wrote, "I hope someday you'll understand why I did what I did." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my drawer. Understanding, I had learned, does not always require agreement. The public consequence wasn't humiliation, it was distance. Rachel learned that not every door opens just because you knock with confidence. Daniel learned that silence can wound just as deeply as action. And I learned that kindness without boundaries is just another way of disappearing. The house became quiet again, not lonely, but intentional. I hosted book club on Wednesdays. I volunteered more hours at the pantry. I laughed louder. I slept better. One evening, I stood in the garage, the same garage where my life had once been boxed up. I looked at the empty space and smiled.
It was just a garage again. There's a moment that comes after the noise fades, after the calls slow and the explanations stop, when you finally hear your own thoughts again. That's where healing really begins. For me, it happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing blueberries, when I realized I wasn't bracing myself for anything. No footsteps behind me, no corrections, no need to explain why I preferred things a certain way. The house felt settled, not because it was empty, but because it belonged to me again. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it teach me. Daniel and I found a rhythm that didn't demand forgiveness on a schedule. He came by once a week, sometimes just to mow the lawn, sometimes to sit and talk. Other times he left a note in the mailbox instead of knocking. "Love you, Mom." No expectations attached. I appreciated that more than he knew. Rachel stayed distant. Not hostile, just removed. I understood that too. Some lessons don't invite closeness right away. They require space to land. One afternoon, Daniel asked if I would like to see the baby. I paused before answering, not because I didn't love my grandson, but because love, I had learned, must arrive with clarity. "Yes," I said, "but here." He nodded immediately. "Of course." The first time Rachel brought the baby back into the house, she stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of where to set the diaper bag. The confidence she once carried so easily had softened. "You can put it on the chair," I said, pointing to the same spot my purse always rested. She hesitated, then did as told. We didn't talk much that day. We didn't need to. I held my grandson, felt the familiar weight of new life against my chest, and something warm loosened inside me. Rachel watched quietly. Before they left, she said, "The house looks nice." "It always did," I replied gently. She nodded. That was enough. Healing didn't mean pretending nothing happened. It meant remembering who I was before I allowed myself to be edited. I began telling my story, not loudly, not bitterly, but honestly, at church luncheons, over tea with neighbors, in quiet conversations with women who leaned in and whispered, "Something like that happened to me too." I realized how common it was, how often women my age were expected to shrink gracefully, to make room without complaint, to confuse sacrifice with virtue. "I thought I was being loving," one woman said, her hands trembling around her cup. "You were, but love doesn't require erasing yourself." That became my quiet mission, not to warn, but to remind. At night, I started writing again. Nothing fancy, just reflections, pages filled with small truths. Silence is not peace. Generosity needs consent. Home is not something you earn by stepping aside. I slept with those pages beside my bed, not as armor, but as grounding. On the anniversary of my husband's death, Daniel asked if we could visit the cemetery together. We stood beneath the maple tree, its branches wider now, more certain of itself. "I wish you were here," Daniel said softly. "So do I replied. "He wouldn't have let this happen," Daniel added. "No," I said, "but he would have been proud of how it ended." Daniel smiled faintly. "I'm proud of you." I squeezed his arm. "That means more than you know." As we walked back to the car, Daniel stopped. "Mom, thank you for not giving up on me." I looked at him carefully. I didn't give up. I stepped back. There's a difference. Life didn't return to what it was. It became something better. I learned to say no without explaining myself, to say yes without guilt, to trust discomfort as a signal, not a flaw. The house filled again, not with people who needed managing, but with moments that felt chosen. One evening, I found myself in the garage again, sorting through old boxes. At the back, I discovered a small stack of letters, notes my husband had written me over the years, apologies, thank yous, love, written in ordinary ink. I sat on the floor and read every one. He had always known what I sometimes forgot, that I was allowed to take up space. If there is a lesson in all of this, it isn't about winning. It's about remembering. Remembering that kindness is strongest when it has edges, that family doesn't mean access without permission, that dignity is not something you negotiate away to keep the peace. I didn't lose my son, I didn't lose my grandson, and I didn't lose my home. I reclaimed myself.
I think about that Sunday sometimes. The one when I left for church, believing my home would be waiting for me just as I'd left it. I think about how easy it would have been to stay silent, to let them move me into the garage, to convince myself that peace meant shrinking, that love meant disappearing. And I wonder how many women listening right now have felt that same pressure. Maybe it wasn't a garage. Maybe it was a spare room taken from you without notice. Maybe it was being told it's easier this way. Easier for who? What I learned is this. You can be loving without being invisible. You can be generous without being displaced. And you can stand your ground without losing your heart. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't shame anyone, I didn't seek revenge. I simply refused to disappear. And in doing so, I taught my son something he didn't even know he needed to learn, that family doesn't survive by pushing people out, but by making room with respect. I shared my story with friends at church, over tea, in quiet conversations with women who leaned in and whispered, "Something like that happened to me too." I realized how often women my age are expected to shrink gracefully, to make space without complaint, to confuse sacrifice with virtue. You might be sitting there wondering if you could have done what I did, or maybe you're thinking about the time someone tried to erase you quietly, politely, under the guise of care. Here's what I want you to know. Your place in this world is not negotiable. Your dignity is not up for debate. Your voice matters, even when others think it shouldn't. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home or struggled to set boundaries with family, I hope my story reminds you of something essential. You have the right to claim your life, your home, and your space. And here's a thought I carry every day. Kindness is strongest when it has edges. Love is strongest when it is not forced, and peace is strongest when it is chosen, not taken. So tell me, if you had come home from church and found your life boxed up in the garage, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up? Would you have waited quietly? Or would you have done exactly what I did, stepped back, gathered your courage, and reclaimed your life? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences in the comments below. And if stories like this speak to you, stories about family, boundaries, betrayal, and finding your strength again, please subscribe for more true emotional stories you won't hear anywhere else. Because sometimes hearing that you're not alone is the first step to finding your own voice.